There has been one modification to it which makes driving it so much more enjoyable, but we'll come to that later. Hello guys, and welcome to this Volkswizard video, which as you can see I'm filming in the middle of nowhere, a long way away from anybody else, so I can comply with the government's very sensible 2-metre social distancing rule, because I may not know I have the coronavirus, because there's a 5-day incubation period during which you'll have no symptoms, but you can still pass it amongst other people, including friends and loved ones, and potentially kill them. So please do comply with that rule. Right, on to today's video then. I'm going to give you an update on living with my 2019 Seat Leon ST 2-litre TDI 150 PS FR Sport DSG, which I bought at the beginning of the year from Stoneacre Seat in Wrexham. I've had it just under 3 months now. I've done just under 4,000 miles, and I use it every day, do about 50 miles minimum each day. There has been one modification to it which makes driving it so much more enjoyable, but we'll come to that later, because primarily it's a workhorse. So let's first talk about MPG. Okay, so in episode 1 I was complaining a bit about the fuel consumption because I wasn't getting close to the 50 miles per gallon I was expecting, and that figure had come from the Leon that I'd been using for a month before I bought this car on my commute, which would do over 50 quite easily. Admittedly, it wasn't an estate car, so it was a bit lighter. It wasn't an FR Sport, so it didn't have big wheels, but that would do sort of 55, so expecting 50 from this more modern diesel was not unreasonable. But the reality is I'm only getting 45.9. that's the long-term MPG, and that's pretty representative of my commute. Yeah, if I drive on some A roads or B roads quite sedately, I'll get a bit more than that. I've never seen 55, I think, on a decent journey. So yeah, it's not as good as I was expecting, but it's still only done just under 4,000 miles. And I think with a diesel, it might take a little bit longer, even up to 10,000 miles before it fully loosens up. So yeah, we can keep our fingers crossed that will improve. Another way to improve it is to drive it harder, I've been told. And the modification that I mentioned earlier actually helps with that. Now, in episode 1, I mentioned the car was a misbuild. It should have come with the paddles. Well, guess what? Even though the Seat dealer I bought the car from said it couldn't be fitted, there they are. And yes, they do work. As soon as I bought the car, I started looking on eBay for a wheel, and this one came up for about £125, which I think is less than a quarter of the price of buying a new one from Seat. It's in brilliant condition. Just a little mark down there. It's the correct facelift one with a black trim here, not silver. I bought it from an established dismantler with a license, so I knew it probably wasn't from a stolen car being broken in someone's backyard in Birmingham. So I'm quite happy with that, because I believe in karma, so I don't really want to buy something that could possibly be stolen, because what goes around comes around. So I can't really explain to you how much difference this makes to my enjoyment of this car, but I can show you by driving. So let's go and have a drive, and I'll show you what it's like driving with these new paddles. Okay, so just driving along normally, because it's a 7-speed DSG, it does put itself into the high gears very quickly. So we're currently in 6th, but we've got this corner coming up, so we just grab the paddle, we're in 4th straight away. And because there's only a narrow power band with the diesel, it's even more important to have paddles so you can just work it perfectly. So onto the brakes, I think we'll go to 3rd for this one, and then we're just right on the power for the exit there. It's lovely. Again, we're into 5th, just you can count your way up to 5th, and then I think 3rd again, so 2 clicks and we're in. And then it's so smooth on the change up as well. It doesn't matter if you're loaded up in a corner, if you're running out of the power band. And there we go. This is a 150 horsepower diesel estate car, but I really do enjoy chucking it around corners, which is partly because the ride is quite firm. If you remember in episode 1, I was slightly concerned that the torsion beam suspension would be the car's downfall, and it still does feel slightly skittish compared to a multi-link car in certain situations. At the corner I drive every day with a bump in it, and the car will just, the back end will just feel like it skips a tiny bit, which you'd never get with multi-link, but you would have got with, say, a Mark IV Golf. But generally, in normal mode or eco mode, which runs the suspension in the middle of its 3 settings, it's perfectly acceptable, subject to the car not being run on the highest of its tyre pressures for non-laden use. So there are 3 pressure settings The highest obviously is if you're carrying stuff in the back, that's like in the 40s. There's another one for normal use without much weight that's 39 psi front and back. And there's another one which is the normal non-laden one, which is 35 front and back. Now I've tried it in 39 to get decent MPG, but I just can't stand it really on the UK. It's not designed for the UK roads really, so I've got it at 37 now. It's obviously a bit better, but I think I'm going to go back to 35 and just take the fuel consumption penalty because it's just much nicer to drive like that. I think the higher normal setting of 39 front and back is to do with WLTP, because the car will use less fuel driven in the normal environment that a WLTP tests on if it's using higher tyre pressures. So yeah, it's another way emissions kind of have ruined the driving of a car, and the Up GTI's got exactly the same higher setting that's completely undrivable, but you can choose to not use it, and that's what I'd recommend. In episode 1 I talked about the car's various driving modes and how I mainly use eco mode and comfort mode. Well, I've now decided to just run the car in eco mode for most of the time, and that means every time I get into it I have to press this button 6 times, because even though it says it's in eco mode now, it's actually in normal mode because you've turned the ignition off. So 6 times puts it back into eco mode proper. It would have been better if it just went into normal mode fully on the display once you turn the ignition off, because then at least you knew where you stood. Now I use eco mode because it gives you the best fuel consumption, and then you get the coasting function as well, which means at the end of your motorway journey you just coast up the slip road and your MPG goes up a significant amount, or coasting down hills as well. It's brilliant. It doesn't actually work all the time. Occasionally it's not actually functioned, but most of the time it works, and the impact on the MPG is pretty good. The other reason eco mode's good is because it runs the suspension in normal mode, which is pretty much perfect for most situations. It's not too hard when you're not in the mood, and it's pretty agile if you do find yourself on a nice road. And you can also dip into the paddles, which have recently been fitted, which give you a lot more control. It's pretty lethargic in eco mode, and that's what it's designed to be economical, but with the paddles you can dip into them and it's much more fun to drive without even having to change the mode. If you want to go back into eco mode and get coasting again, you just hold the paddle back and it sends the gears back into E, so that's pretty good. There have been a couple of minor glitches while I've had the car, but nothing's been worth taking it to a main dealer to be looked at for. The first one happened quite early on, and that was the infotainment screen staying on. When I took the key out of the ignition, it should come off like that, but that was resolved by just turning the ignition on and off a couple of times. The other one was the cruise control, which stopped working a couple of times. One quite recently, once about a couple of months ago. What would happen was that the symbol for it there would turn amber and it just wouldn't work, but that resolved itself with the ignition going on and off. Now, build quality has generally been excellent. There are a couple of things that have annoyed me though. Just turn the ignition off. Firstly, there's this bit on the leather that seems to get caught by my jean pockets. It seems to be wearing a bit prematurely. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a bit lighter than the rest of the leather. It's a very hard seam there, so you do tend to rub it. So I've rubbed some cream into there to soften it up a bit. The other thing is, every time you get in and out of the car, you touch this section of the door and it's got like a rough edge, which is really quite nasty. I've tried a Golf recently and it hasn't got this, so I wonder if it can be sort of filed down a bit, because it's just this moulding for the B-pillar. But apart from that, it's been brilliant, and I've driven a lot of Mark 7 Golfs and lived with them over many thousands of miles, and I can tell you this car feels at least as tight as one of those. Another little modification I've made, which is somewhat less exciting than the paddles but probably a bit more useful, is the installation of a full-size spare wheel, because all you get with this car is a tyre repair kit, which, let's face it, is pretty useless. The good news is you do get a full-size spare wheel well, so it seems a shame not to use it. In there is just a cheap Mark 5 Golf 16-inch steel wheel. You can pretty much fit anything from Mark 5, Mark 6 or Mark 7. Just make sure it clears the brake calipers, which are pretty tiny on this car anyway, and also you'll need to buy yourself a jack and a brace. Okay, now I'd like to talk about this car's eco-credentials, because being a diesel, many people see it as the devil on four wheels thanks to media misinformation. But this is a modern EU6 compliant diesel, and that means it's only marginally worse than a petrol car when it comes to nitrogen dioxide emissions, which affect air quality, and it's way better when it comes to CO2 emissions. And this one goes one better as well, because it runs selective catalyst regeneration, AdBlue. That means a urea substitute is pumped into the combustion process that makes the air coming out of the exhaust even cleaner. Now, I've never actually seen this on a Golf before, but that could just be my lack of knowledge of the latest Golfs. But there next to the diesel filler is the AdBlue filler. When I picked the car up, the range for AdBlue, because you do have to fill it up like diesel, but obviously not as often, was 5,000 miles, and it's going to work out like that, I think, because the car's just under 4,000 miles and it's got 1,500 miles to go. And it's not an expensive fill at all. It's a small price to pay to know you're driving a car with one of the most environmentally friendly internal combustion engines inside it. Okay then, so to summarise, me and the Leon ST are getting on just fine. It may not be as good on fuel as the old SE that I drove before it, but it makes up for that by being so much better to drive. It's also a lot more practical being an estate car and being an FR Sport. I think it looks rather lovely, one of the best looking cars in its class, no doubt. And in memory blue, it looks even better, so good that I really ought to wash it more than every 5 weeks, which is what I've been doing since I bought it. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this Volks Wizard video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, please comment, please share, please subscribe. Hopefully we can beat this coronavirus thing, and I'll see you for the next one really soon.